In 1941, Marvel Comics released Captain America. The reason why Captain America was so popular?
Die, Hitler!
He beat up Hitler. Anyone can beat up Hitler, but due to the time period, it being shortly after Pearl Harbor was bombed, it made Captain America widely popular, especially with young audiences. Captain America is one of the most well-known comics of the Golden Age. So what is the Golden Age of comics? The Golden Age of comics was a time roughly between the late 1930s and early 1950s, during which comic books reached a large variety of viewers. During this time, superheroes became popular, such as Superman, Batman, Captain America, Wonder Woman, and Captain Marvel. Comic books were the visual arts rage of the 1940s. In 1943, comic books sold over 25 million copies per month, which amassed to $30 million by the end of the year. In 1945, the Market Research Company of America determined that 70 million Americans, about half the population, read comic books. Comic books had positive and negative effects on the perception of many contemporary issues, including World War II. The effects of superheroes spurred on the war effort. Young people reading these comics would feel patriotic, such as in the case of Captain America, whose comic series was created solely for the purpose of supporting the war. Comic books such as Captain America were really popular because they were cheap and showed themes of good defeating evil, represented by the heroic Captain America triumphing over the evil Nazi soldiers. Furthermore, comic books encouraged normal citizens to support the war by advertising for war bonds, as shown in this cover of Batman. Comic books were also an essential part of soldiers' experiences during the war, as they served as a distraction from the war. They were also used occasionally as instruction manuals because soldiers could read them without too much focus and absorb the information quickly. One negative effect of comics on World War II, however, was this thing. Yes, this thing. Since comic books are so popular and influential for young people, and therefore for the general public, they could be used to popularize things like the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb was seen in a negative light, but certain comics, such as Atomic Rabbit, later known as Atomic Bunny, tries to make the nuclear bomb seem friendlier and mask its destructiveness. As everyone knows though, the A-bomb and the H-bomb had devastating effects, even when the comic books tried to make them seem benign and harmless to Americans. It's important to remember that the creators of comic books can often skew public opinion through comics. Captain America, for instance, was created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon. Kirby was raised by Jewish immigrants. Captain America was, therefore, created partly by a Jewish man during the Holocaust. The comic storyline was most likely influenced by Kirby's own religious beliefs and of course would support the war against the Germans and the Japanese working with them. Just to be clear, these two are Iron Fist and Power Man, who are not from the Golden Age of comics, but who we thought represented minorities in comics. Let's start with the negatives, to remind you that at this time, Jim Crow laws were still in place. Anyone who was not white, and specifically not a Christian, was looked down upon as inferior and other. Due to World War II and the fighting against Japan, there was anti-Asian sentiment, not to mention everyone was just racist. Because a lot of young people read comic books, it was especially harmful when minorities in comics were portrayed as inferior and unintelligent, or cowardly and untrustworthy. Often, if not always, minorities were sidekicks as opposed to protagonists or heroes themselves. One such example is Wing, the sidekick of the Crimson Avenger. Wing is seen as small in stature, and he has buck teeth, which is typical for East Asian stereotypes. He also speaks extremely bad English, and his eyes are so slanted that they look just like slits. Kinda like Brock from Pokemon. See the annoyed faces in the background? That's how we feel about racist stereotypes. African American characters were no better off than Asians. In the Young Allies series, for example, there was a quote-unquote multiracial group of sidekicks featuring African American whitewashed villains. What whitewashes white pals were good fighters, really smart, or really intimidating, Whitewash himself was cowardly and dim-witted. His talents when introduced are playing the harmonica and eating watermelon, and he wears a straw hat, which is reminiscent of pre-Civil War slavery. This negative view on minorities made white Americans continue to view them as inferior. These comic book sidekicks perpetuated the stereotypes of the time period. Additionally, the role of a sidekick itself is limited and viewed as unimportant compared to the role of a hero, which was often filled by a tall, majestic white man. There are respectable sidekicks such as Robin, Batman's sidekick, or the other members of the Young Allies. However, these sidekicks were all white, emphasizing the prominent racism. Robin and the other Young Allies are all extremely capable young men. Wing and Whitewash are seen as stupid and incompetent because of the stereotypes of Asians and African Americans. They are inferior enough as sidekicks, but because of the stigma of their skin color, they are seen as even more base and unworthy. Stan Lee, the accredited creator of Marvel and one of the creators of Whitewash Jones, said of the creation of the X-Men comics during the Silver Age, "It occurred to me that instead of them being just heroes that everybody admired, what if I made other people fear and suspect and actually hate them because they were different?" I loved that idea. It not only made them different, but it was a good metaphor for what was happening with the civil rights movement in the country at that time. Although he was talking about the Silver Age, the sentiment remains the same for the Golden Age, which came before it. Characters like Whitewash Jones were meant to be hated because they were different. They were made fun of. This racist portrayal reinforced racist attitudes amongst comic book readers.
After World War II, superhero comic books started to wane in popularity because they no longer served as larger purpose. Captain America and Superman, who were patriotic and who went on crusades battling foreign villains, fell out of favor because of the peace that came after the war, and America started to hide back in its pre-war isolationist policies. Comic books are still around today, but they aren't as influential as they were in their golden days, during the golden age of comics.
Hello, I am Baymax. I cannot deactivate until you say you are satisfied with our presentation.